Hello everybody and welcome back to Operation Logistics, where we are currently checking our world hex adjacency for our upgraded pathfinding. So, as you can see, the time for biome generation wasn't actually that much higher, 28.44 seconds. That's pretty comparable, really. So let's go ahead and be checking this world hex here. This should be... where's our adjacency here? Neighbors. Here we go. Has 3. And specifically, it is these 3 world hexes. So that one has 4. And then it is also connected to that one and that one. So that appears to be correct. Excellent. So with that working, we can pretty safely come on over into our pathfinding and start working on pathfind in world hexes. Now this will be easy enough. So if 2 equals null or from equals null, we're basically going to be doing exactly the same thing, but in world hexes.neighbors, as we did in this here. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of this, and then we'll fix the bugs, because there will be some issues here. And we'll go ahead and place this right there. And then we need this as well. Okay. And I think we need a closing brace. Yes, we do. Okay. So we don't have a hex manager for this. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and rename compare F to be compare F building. Actually, no, I'm not. We're going to leave that the way it is and put in overloads for that. The only reason I wanted to not do overloads for the other pathfinding was because we were going to be returning world hexes and int3s, which is fine. Okay, so instead of these being a list of buildings, these should instead be a list and a hash set of world hexes. Like so. Okay, in the world hex, we are going to need a little bit here. I'm going to do a header pathfinding. Public float f g h public world hex pathfinding parent. There we go. Okay. So obviously we don't have a get distance variant for world hexes. We'll need to implement that. So we'll do a public static float get distance, and this will be building, or not building, this will be world hex from world hex 2. We're going to use the same exact Manhattan distance. So this will just be if from equals null or 2 equals null. We don't need a hex manager for this, so that's fine. Debug.log error pathfinding.getDistance unknown parameter passed. There we go. Get ourselves a nice little error, return -1. And then down here, vector3 from location equals from.transform.position. And then vector3 to location equals to.transform.position. And then we just simply return mathf.abs, exactly like we did up above. That'll be from location.x minus to location.x plus mathf.abs from location.y minus to location.y. There's our get distance function. As far as our get entry cost, that is simply going to always be 1. 1F. We'll use 1F. For compare F, this will be exactly the same thing. Like, literally exactly, but instead of taking buildings, we will take world hexes. And that just works. Excellent. So instead of building current, this would be world hex current. And then blah, 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 blah. Instead of current.position, it would be current.transform.position. But instead of vector3.path, or instead of a list of vector 3s for this, we're going to want a list of world hex for this. And that would just be putting in current. So we don't care about that, we want that. For each world hex, and instead of building, we'll call this hex enclosed list. We'll go ahead and reset all of these. Excellent. And then we have our path succeeded. I'll call this a world hex path succeeded with 0 steps. This will need to be a world hex X in current.neighbors. And we'll just put in hex in all of these positions. And theoretically, this should be plug and play, but we're just going to do current.g plus 1. We don't need to pass in the hex manager here. Excellent. This will be current G plus 1F. Then we will pass in all of this, and again, that should all just be plug and play. For each world hex, hex enclosed list. Okay. There we go. So now, we're probably going to create ourselves a full new function here for pathfind that will utilize this, that will utilize all three of these in a relatively replaceable manner. So we'll just do a public static list of vector3 pathfind. Vector3 from vector3 to. And that's going to be all we're going to want, probably. Right? Because this is building from building to, which is fine. And then we'll do a couple of overloads here. Public static list vector3 pathfind world hex from world hex to, and then public static list vector3 pathfind int3 from int3 to. In fact, int3 from int3 to should be our standard, now that I think about it. That should be what we should be going for. Exactly that. Okay. So the first thing we need to do in this function is determine if we're going out of the world hex. So if from.worldHex is not equal to 2.worldHex, then that's easy enough. However, pathfind world hexes. We'll do that here in a bit. Else, if from, no, not form, if from.biomehex is not equal to from dot, or rather is not equal to 2.biomehex, then we're changing biome hexes. So pathfind biome hexes. We are assuming, as of right now, that changing world hex also changes biome hex. That's a pretty safe assumption, I'm going to go ahead and say. Else, literally all we need to do is pathfind building to vector 3, and then we'd need to grab our building and our hex manager. So otherwise, hex manager equals game object dot find game object with tag. Do we have it tagged? That would be awful convenient if we do. We do, hex manager. So find game object with tag, hex manager dot get component hex manager. Okay. And then we'd be able to pass in manager dot get building by index. That returns the building. And then we pass in front. And then manager dot get building by index. We pass in 2. And then manager as our manager. Okay. So if we're within the hex, then it will just do what we've been doing previously. Excellent. And one thing we might want to do here is add in a list or a pair of lists here. List world hex. World hex inclusion equals null. And a list int3. Can we compile that down? I feel like we can't really. Biome hex inclusion equals null. So we're not going to pass those in. We're not going to do anything with them just now. But we are going to come on up here. And I do want to make sure that in our root, we are using pathfind. And we should go ahead and pass in the int3. So rather than get nearest building, we would want to pass in the index. Actually, this is fine. We would just use dot location. Dot location. And we don't need to pass in the manager. Okay. Now, obviously, this doesn't necessarily return a value. We would want to return pathfind building to vector 3 here. Okay. So, we're trying to pathfind our world hexes at this point. So, the first thing we should do is we should say list world hex inclusion equals pathfind in world hexes from .world hex to .world hex. Right? Not convert from int.world hex. Oh, right. What am I talking about? We do definitely need the manager, no matter what. We will only call that once, though, so that shouldn't be too bad. I mean, we could pass it in. We could pass it in. It'll be slightly faster, and that might be important. So in the root here, we will go ahead and pass in the... Hang on, what am I doing? I want to be in here. Then we pass in the manager. There we go. And then we want manager dot get world hex by index. And then we pass in from dot world hex. And then manager dot get world hex by index. And that is, of course, 2.world hex. There we go. So that gets us our list of world hexes to include. Now we can assume that this is true. So what if we were to do this? If from.biomehex is not equal to 2.biomehex, or this is also true. I want this to execute if either of these are true, but this one only if this is true. So let's go ahead and do a list of world hexes, world hex inclusion. We'll set that up here. We'll set this to null by default. And then we will just set this here. You mean world hex inclusion? Oh, I didn't capitalize the I. There we go. And then list int3 biome hex inclusion equals null. We're going to do the same thing here. Pathfind biome hexes. And to do that, we are going to want to pass in world hex inclusion. Right? Well, the question then becomes, how are we going to do biome hex adjacency? And that's a very good question. Maybe for now we should just see if this narrows it down enough to make it nice and fast. That could be a possibility. So essentially we would just do this. And then the pathfind in biome hexes here we can get rid of for now, just to see if this is good enough. And then here we would return pathfind to building vector 3, or pathfind building to vector 3, and this would be manager dot get building by index from, and then manager dot get building by index 2. We'd pass in the manager, and then the world hex inclusion would be world hex inclusion, like that. Then down in this pathfinding here, in the world hex inclusion, we would want to do something along the lines of this. Hash set. This would be world hex. World hexes to consider equals null. Then, for each world hex in world hex inclusion, we'd go ahead and iterate through that, and then we would say world hexes to consider dot add. Actually, instead of making this be null, we'd make this be a new hash set world hex. World hexes to consider dot add, and then we'd add in hex. Okay? And then we would have to have a way to check to see if this is essentially has nothing in it. So down here, when we are considering a building here in current.neighbors, we can get rid of the building.walkable. That's not something we're going to be using, but we can go ahead and say, and actually, I'm going to do this in a separate statement right here. But before we do that, it is time to put a cut in, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and next episode, we will finish this. See you all then.